President Putin's former chief economic advisor says that energy embargoes are crucial to stopping Russia's war machine. Andrei Illarionov told the BBC a full embargo on Russian oil and gas could end the invasion within a couple of months. He also said a change of government in Russia is inevitable sooner or later. Joining us live now is Angela Stent, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. She's also the author of Putin's World, Russia Against the West and With the Rest. All right, Angela, thank you so much for being with us. Are sanctions the right way? Are sanctions the right response in terms of getting Putin to change course here?
Well, the sanctions aren't going to get him to change course, we know that. But Russia had to be punished for what it's done. If there were no sanctions, the Russians would think they could get away with all of this with impunity. And since President Biden made it clear that there would be no NATO troops directly confronting Russians in Ukraine, sanctions really were the only option. And these are very far-reaching and tough sanctions. They've already affected the Russian economy. They will affect it even more in the future, particularly the export controls, all of the banking sanctions. And of course, the last piece of that would be a total embargo on Europeans purchasing Russian hydrocarbons. That hasn't come yet, and I think that will still take some time to come. But at least the Russian economy and Russian society will suffer from all of that, and they will have to pay for the horrors that they've unleashed in Ukraine.
The IMF is predicting that Russia's economy would shrink by roughly 11% or so this year. But my last guest actually said that the impact could actually be much smaller than that. Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball here, but he didn't believe that it was that the impact would be as great as other people, including the IMF, necessarily think. So if that's the case, then how should the next round of sanctions, the sixth round of sanctions, be tailored and targeted in order to inflict maximum impact?
Well, I think that the only thing left really are the energy sanctions. I mean, if you're pumping billions and billions into the Russian economy all the time, that helps fuel paying for the war. If they didn't have that money, they couldn't expend it on their military like that. It would have to come from somewhere else. So those really are, those are the last remaining big sanctions. Practically everything else has been sanctioned.
So how likely is it, especially countries like, for example, Germany, that rely very heavily on Russian energy, how likely is it that, they're going to agree to much larger sanctions, especially when it comes to embargoes on Russian oil and gas?
Well, so far they haven't done that. I think they've agreed to not purchase Russian coal, but they are dependent still on Russian natural gas and oil. And the German Chancellor Scholz has said, this isn't the time to do it. He's being pressed to do so by his Green foreign minister and the vice chancellor, who's also from the Green Party. So I think it'll take some time to do that. I wouldn't expect that anytime soon.
So there's been sanctions, as you know, against, you just touched on it, Russian coal, for example, that's been embargoed by the EU. There's also been sanctions against Russian oligarchs, sanctions against Russian banks. I mean, energy aside, is any of that having a large-scale impact, do you think?
Well, it's not having an impact on the policy so far, as I said, but it certainly is having an impact on the Russian economy, on ordinary people's ability to buy things. The shelves are already quite empty in a large number of places. Inflation, and some of the same things, of course, that the West is suffering from the sanctions. So it's having an economic impact, and it's impacting those oligarchs who are sanctioned too. But of course, they're not going to have any impact on the Kremlin's decision-making. Those decisions are made by President Putin and a very small group of people around him. And even, as we've just heard with the Austrian Chancellor going there, yes, he gave him a piece of his mind and told him what he'd seen. But, Putin isn't necessarily going to believe any of that. So he's pretty much insulated in what he's doing from the realities of the outside world.
So these sanctions are not necessarily causing Vladimir Putin to change course, but they are having an impact on the Russian people and causing the Russian people to suffer. By the way, many of whom do not support this war, many of whom do not support Vladimir Putin, whether they openly admit it or not. Is there a better way? I mean, obviously, you talk about the fact that options are limited, of course. I mean, they're not going to put boots on the ground. Ukraine isn't a member of NATO. But just given that it's not having the desired impact of ending the war and it's causing ordinary people to suffer, many of whom, again, do not necessarily support him, is there a better way to go about this?
Well, I'm afraid I don't agree with the assessment that many of them don't support him. You know, the latest independent poll by the Levada organization shows an 83% support for Putin and overwhelming support for the war. A lot of people who didn't support it, a few 100,000 have left Russia, but there are far more people who support this war than I think we want to believe. And it's partly because they're being told that this is a war against Nazis, just as World War II was. And so Ukrainians are dehumanized by calling them Nazis, and others of them believe that this is a war against the United States. In fact, that's what Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, said today, and they definitely support that. So unfortunately, we would like to think that a large number of people don't support the war, but indeed many of them do. The only better way would have been, if there'd been, you know, if you wanted to end this quicker, would have been, first of all, to supply some of the weaponry that the Ukrainians are still asking for and has not been supplied to them, the fighter jets and things like that, or not to have taken off the table a NATO response to this. I understand why it was taken off the table, because clearly they, you know, the NATO countries don't want to get into a direct conflict with Russia. But if it believes that it can get away with all the humanitarian crisis it's caused and all of these atrocities against civilians, it's going to continue doing it.